Hi, and welcome to Deep Leadership. I'm your host, John Rennie. If you're anything like me, you love to see an elite performance. Whether it's an Olympian like Michael Phelps or sports figures like Michael Jordan or Tom Brady, we're fascinated at people who can perform at the highest level. There's a common thread with these individuals. They all have an elite mindset. I'm honored today to have Dr. Larry Widman on the show. He's an elite mindset coach who works directly with athletes and leaders to develop this kind of mindset. If you want to build the best version of what you're capable of, it starts with your mind. This is a powerful episode that you don't want to miss. So, are you ready to dive in? Let's get started.
Welcome to Deep Leadership. Leadership is a people business. That's the philosophy of your podcast host, John Rennie. As a former Cold War submarine officer who spent 20 plus years leading businesses in corporate America before starting his own manufacturing business, he knows that leadership matters. Are you ready for some real-world actionable advice from John as well as his expert guests?
I'm ready.
The show starts right now.
Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Dr. Larry Widman. Larry is a high-performance psychiatrist and an elite mindset coach. He works with CEOs, professional athletes, Olympians, NCAA Sports Teams, all these to develop the mental skills and mindset to push the boundaries of performance. He's also the co-founder of Performance Mountain, a company dedicated to helping people and organizations reach their peak potential. He hosts the Max Out Mindset podcast, where he interviews people performing at elite levels. And if that's not enough, he's also the author of a new book called Max Out Mindset, Proven Strategies that Prepare You and Your Team for Battle in Business, Sport, and Life. Larry's an expert on the mindset for high performance, and I'm excited to have him on the show. So, Larry, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, it's great that you're here, and I'm really excited to talk to you about your new book and kind of the mindset, this idea of elite mindset. And I got to start off and I got to ask you this question. So, as I said in the introduction, you're both a high-performance psychiatrist and an elite mindset coach. Help me understand, or help us understand, what those two roles are. Are they different? Are they the same? What do you do in those roles?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, they're quite a bit different. And, I spent a fair amount of my life being a traditional psychiatrist. And along the way, it became through insurance and other factors, we became sort of pill pushers. And it just never sat very well with me, meaning we got to diagnose and give medications, and all the evolution and improvement in life was the therapist, and everybody else got to help people with that. So eventually I started transitioning into a role where I ran the addiction unit of a couple hospitals, and where I got to be around a lot of high performers, meaning as long as they were able to manage their addiction, most of them were able to go back and do wonderful things in their life. They were CEOs and doctors and lawyers and teachers and everything in between, a lot of military personnel. And so my role as a high-performance psychiatrist was more as a part traditional psychiatrist, meaning I was still there to diagnose and treat mental illness, but I did it through the lens of what I'd call almost a wellness model, meaning how do you help people elevate their performance once they've taken care of their issues, so to speak. So, we live in this world where we're in this sick model all the time, where we take care of people that are sick and try to make them better. And I always like the notion of, you can treat people even though they're doing fairly well in life and help them elevate performance. So, but in the high performance psychiatry world, I'm actually using my medical license, and I am helping people through a lens of high performance deal with their issues, and then, maybe take it up a notch, so to speak. So it's very different than what I do as an elite mindset coach. And in that role, which I do much more of now, I always tell people I don't use my psychiatry lens. I'm here. I don't keep a medical chart on you. I'm not here to diagnose and treat mental illness. I may be aware that there are some issues going on and refer you to see somebody in that situation. But here I'm truly helping people with things such as with confidence and composure and focus and things like that. People that are already doing fairly well in whatever their endeavor is, but maybe you're struggling in one area, or saying, hey, how do I even take it up a notch? Like, I want to play at the next level, or I want to be the CEO of that company. And I know that if I don't learn how to calm my nervous system a little bit better under pressure, that I'm not going to get there, for example. So that's, an elite mindset coach is all about training the building blocks for an elite mindset and then helping them to get there.
How did you end up in this field? I mean, obviously in the world of psychiatry, there's a lot of different avenues you can go in, and you went into this one area, but then you've sort of switched gears now and gone into this elite mindset. What attracted you to that, going in and doing that and working with teams and CEOs, and what was the attraction there for you?
Yeah, well, like I said, the first part was I just had a bad taste about being the person who just prescribed medications. I was always a believer that you could help people in different ways through thinking through things and giving them perspective and giving them strategies. But it really was just a fluke. In 2007, I'd moved back to Lincoln, Nebraska, and I was working at the hospital, and a very high performing athlete from the University of Nebraska had a mental health crisis. And I just happened to be the one on call. And the head physician there, Dr. Albers, essentially liked the way I helped this person get better and asked me if I would come on board and help out and consult at the University of Nebraska Athletic Department. So it was really kind of a fluke. I actually told him no at the time because I was too busy, but about a year later, I asked if the offer was still there. And my initial role, even in Nebraska, was more as a high-performance psychiatrist, but I saw that there was a need there, that there weren't enough people getting help on performance issues. And how do you elevate performance? How do you develop a better mindset? Because at that level, at the Division I level, and really I've learned at all levels, that's the big separator. They're all training physically, and they got nutrition and strength and conditioning and all the things that help an athlete perform at their best. But back in 2007, and even now to some degree, not everybody works on their mind. And we know that at the highest levels, that's the great separator because everybody's talented. So it really was a fluke. But then I just learned to have a love for working with high performers because I loved helping taking people from where they're at on the edges of elite to elite. Not to say there's anything wrong with helping people at the bottom. I did that for a long time where maybe the goal was to get somebody from being homeless to living in a group home. And there's a reward in that as well. But for me, there's a real thrill and a passion for helping people that I already consider to be a very high level performer. They're either have barriers that are keeping you from getting there, or they just want more resilience to take them up even another notch to become the best at what they do.
Oh, I love that. That's great. And so you co-founded Performance Mountain, and that's the organization that you do this coaching through. Is that right?
Yeah, certainly. So what happens with Performance Mountain, it was really born out of a 3-year collaboration that Jack Riggins, who is my partner, and he's a Navy SEAL commander. I think he's been on your show.
He's been on our show, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he was still stationed in Germany at the time that I met him. And Coach John Cook from the University of Nebraska volleyball program had heard him speak to, I think, the football team or a business in Lincoln. And I'd been working with the volleyball team for a bit at that point. And he asked me about Jack, if I knew him. And I said, maybe it'd be great if Jack came and spoke with the team too. And I had an ulterior motive after I got to know Jack. But essentially, we spent about 3 years together helping Nebraska volleyball, and especially John Cook, elevate his performance. And it culminated in that team winning the 2015 national championship.
Wow.
Around that same time, with politics and some things, they were no longer allowing part-time help to work at the university. They only wanted full-time people. So we were essentially out at that point. But we decided to use what we had learned in our 3 years together, helping Coach John Cook and our team within a team and all the things that we had done to do it again for athletic teams and businesses who wanted it outside of the university setting. And so that's essentially how we started the company. And really the goal of that company was to help people kind of develop elite mindsets and winning culture. And because we'd all worked our entire lives to be elite, we felt like we could give back, by teaching what we've learned through our lens, with the goal of empowering teams and to maximize potential and minimize friction points, all those kind of things to get people to what we call communicate at the speed of trust, and what we say optimize performance when it matters. I always say if you can't do it when it matters, what's the point? And then since that time, we've added Danny Woodhead, who's a former NFL 10-year career there. He has a really neat story, his own life experiences, but he also caught a touchdown pass at the Super Bowl from Tom Brady as an undrafted free agent. And then Lauren Cook is another member of our team, All-American volleyball player and played professionally as well. And then we have Coach Tom Osborne, who won 3 national titles at Nebraska, was a congressman and athletic director. And he kind of just helps support us and will help us in some of our outlets as well. And just a neat man. So, that's kind of our team. We work with teams and we work with businesses. Last year, I would tell you the one team that we worked with in collaboration, Danny, Jack, and I, was the Creighton men's basketball team for the first time. They were picked to finish 7th in the Big East Conference. I will tell you they finished 7th, but they finished 7th in the country and won the Big East Conference Championship before COVID canceled the season. So we really love working with high-performing athletic teams that already have a great culture and help them sort of hone in and elevate their performance, and sometimes using the different lenses of what it's taken to be great over the years I think is just an advantage for some teams and businesses to learn from one of us more than the other sometimes. Or certain people like to hear what Jack has to say as a Navy SEAL, or Danny's a football player who's made a living as a professional. And sometimes they want to hear the short, bald scientist every once in a while as well. So.
Well, that's got to be an interesting group just to be around. I mean, just the discussions you might have, like you said, the diversity between, a Navy SEAL, professional athletes, very high performing college athletes, then, professional volleyball players. And Tom, I mean, that's got to be just an interesting mix of just great minds and great experiences in one room. That's got to be pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think that's what's fun, is that we do have different lenses, but I will tell you the reason why Jack and I hit it off so much is that we almost have complete alignment, how you help people and teams optimize their performance, and the same mental skills they were teaching in the Navy SEALs. When I brought him to Jack and said, are they teaching these? He says, well, I kind of use different terms, but they were the exact same ones. So we were in complete alignment about the importance of love and what role that plays in building elite teams, because so many coaches think that you just need to train, and you just want killers. And I think coaches expected Jack to give them that message. And when they heard that Jack was giving the same message, that it's all about relationships and it's all about connection and love, and that's why we're willing to fight for the guy on our right and fight for a guy on our left. That's why we have such elite teams. And so that synergy between his lens and mine has really made a difference for certain teams.
That's really interesting. I know you've read my book, and I do talk about love and relationships in the world of leadership. And if you don't have that relationship, if you don't have a love for people, if you don't have a love for the people that you're shoulder to shoulder with every day, then if you're just doing it for the title or the money or the bonus checks or what have you, everybody knows it, and your performance is never going to be at the level of that it could be. So that's really interesting that what I've learned in leadership is very consistent with, performing at a high level in a team. That's really interesting. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, because I loved your book. So, I mean, that's sort of inspired me to write my book, actually, or I should say finish my book.
Well, I'm excited. I just recently it's now out, or it's in pre-order right now. And so let's talk about your book. So it's called Max Out Mindset. So what is the book about? Give us a kind of an overview of what you're doing in this book, and who's the audience for this book?
Yeah, so over the past 20 years, kind of like I said, I've really been blessed to work with some of the best teams and coaches and athletes and other high performers, really in all sectors, business, sport, and life. And so in writing the book, I tried to organize my thoughts and my philosophies and beliefs based on those years of experience, and also through Performance Mountain. And so in the book, I try to outline the steps necessary to become elite. And I do that through recounting of stories from coaches and athletes and teams that I worked with to share their insights on how to max out when it matters the most. And I use what I call the 15 powers outlined within to learn how to prepare for battle, and then max out your mind, max out your emotions, and then max out your team. And I just really felt by writing this book that whether you're a coach or an athlete or a business leader, or really just trying to improve your own mindset for life, that the stories that highlight the struggles and accomplishments, the highs and the lows, and everything in between that accompanies what I call pursuing the edges of elite will help you max out as well. So my goal was to really have people use the book in its entirety, or even individual chapters, each representing a different power, more to help, with the lessons necessary to be in the best position to max out when it matters the most. Because my book's called Max Out Mindset, when it matters the most. And then the rest of it that you described.
Okay. So when it matters the most, I like that. It's interesting. More and more, with this COVID, crisis that we're in right now, it's really interesting because mental health was not something that was high on anyone's discussion list, right? In the business world, we're all gung ho, get orders, meet with customers. It was a lot of just, run our businesses, run them, get better. But with the change that happened in the world, with COVID and all the changes, you're starting to see a lot more people thinking and talking about the mental side of business more, which is really interesting because it's not something I've been leading for 30 years. It's the first time I've ever heard anyone spending any time talking about the mental health side of it. And so you're dealing with sort of the getting to that elite level, right? So taking your mindset to that where you can achieve really the top of your game. But, I'm, like I said, even in my world, I would say non-elite world, we're seeing mindset is a big issue. Mental state is a big issue. Especially as leaders, we're facing the unknown right now. And so we have to sort of, how do I gird myself for this unknown that I'm about to face today, coming into the work where I might have a sick employee or that might have COVID. How do I deal with that? Can I open my business? So there's so many issues we're facing. So it's really interesting that the mental side of it is becoming more, it is trickled down to just every company and everyone that owns a business is dealing with this right now. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on that. So one, I always tell people if they want to have an elite mindset, they have to I always put my mental health hat on and say, you have to take care of your mental health. That, 1 out of 4 high-performing women, 1 out of 5 men are going to suffer depression, anxiety, PTSD, addiction issues. And sometimes high performers are even more prone to those kind of things because of perfectionism. But I'm glad you brought that up because everybody's got the potential for an elite mindset, or what I call the best version of the mindset. Of course, not everyone is Bill Gates and not everyone is Michael Jordan, but that doesn't mean that you can't develop an elite mindset of your own, meaning what I call it is just the best version of what you're capable of. So I always remind people, especially as you pointed out today, you've got to take care of your mental health. And what's really crazy, John, is that as I've been working with so many teams right now with kids between 16 and 24 years old, the number of them that are reporting psychological distress right now between their own natural wiring and life and then add COVID in board, initially I thought maybe they were embellishing a bit, but upwards of 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4 were actually telling us in our group setting that they'd had suicidal thoughts in the past several months. And then the CDC just came out with a report a few weeks ago that said that 1 out of 4 people between the ages of 18 and 24 had contemplated suicide in the past month due to the pandemic. And so what you're seeing and what I'm seeing are in complete alignment, that there is so much distress going on right now. And I think I know why at that level even more, at the kids level, that maybe we mishandled as parents or adults, but because initially, and I can tell you from my own world and experiences, that as they were losing things like prom and sports and graduation, we always tried to give them perspective and say, it could be so much worse. You could be homeless or somebody in your family could have died. But I think what the kids were starting to hear, even though it wasn't intentional from a lot of us, is that we were discounting what they were feeling. Meaning anytime they told us about a loss, we're like, yeah, but it could be so much worse. But then, you lose your sports and you lose seeing your friends and you're isolated and you're being taught remotely. Maybe you lose a summer trip and maybe you lose your job because you work in an area where, things are shut down, like a waiter or a waitress that a lot of kids do or what have you. And they get punched and we're telling them, hey, it could be worse. And I think there's so much distress there. And as we're opening that can of worms, I think we found a new way to start reaching out and helping these kids. But there's a lot of distress in kids and adults right now. More than I've ever seen.
Yeah, same. I was going to say same here, and I don't get into the world of mental health at all. I mean, I'm a business guy, right? I'm a nuclear engineer. I'm probably the worst guy to talk about mental health, right? But I see it. I see it in my employees. I see it in other CEOs I talk to, other business leaders, everyone's kind of facing a high level of anxiety right now. So it's really interesting. So it is a mindset. And I like what you talked about as far as, at least, I talk about it too, as far as being a leader. You have to take care of yourself, mentally, spiritually, physically, if you want to just kind of stay strong, because, at least in terms of leader, everybody's depending on you, and you got the world on your shoulders. You better take care of yourself, because if you don't, you're going to fall apart pretty easily. So, yeah, that's really interesting. So you said you're sharing some of the stories are in the book. That are these some of the people that you work with, and some of the teams you work with in the book? Do you tell some of those stories?
Yeah, I've been lucky because I have about 100 different athletes and teams that have either given me permission to tell me their stories, or they're already public information. They shared them in the paper or on podcasts or what have you. So I would never share a mental health story or something, really any story, if I wasn't given the okay to do that. But most of it's public, and most of everything I wrote, I got permission in advance for. But I do teach through the lens of sport, because I do think there's a lot of lessons you can learn there, and it's the way I decided to teach it. And so I work with 3 or 4 teams over a long period of time in Nebraska volleyball, Nebraska bowling, and Nebraska women's gymnastics. And I also work with Creighton volleyball. And those 4 teams I had 7 or 8 years of experience with. And then, I put in a lot of different stories from Nebraska football, and Pete Carroll and Steve Kerr and lots of national people as well. But, the personal stories are the ones that I thought would be the ones that would help resonate and teach a lesson from the different powers I'm teaching about. All right, how do you overcome this? Or what can I learn from this through the lens of sport per se, that will help me in life? Because they overlap completely. And I always tell people my biggest why is to help really young people become empowered young men and women, so that by the time they're in their early 20s, they have great self-esteem. They know how they want to be treated by others, particularly men or women, that they know that they can take on the world and do anything they set their mind to do. And that's a hard shift to get to from 16 to 22. And so a big part of my why is helping empower them. And so, of course, we're always teaching through that lens, like anything you can learn in sport, handling adversity, accepting your role, dealing with tough conversations. How do you resolve conflict? All those things that make teams and athletes great give them a huge advantage as you move forward in life. And compared to their peers that have a traditional college experience, they are sought after by the business world and the professional world, because they have had to deal with, managing time and dealing with 20 or 30 hours of sport and dealing with failure. A lot of kids today, they don't ever deal with failure or learn how to develop grit. But when you're on the big stage, or even any stage in sport, you're out there to fail all the time in front of people. And you have to learn how to move on to the next play, to the next point, to the next game, and how to help pick up your teammates when they're struggling. It's just a huge advantage later on in life. And it's why so many student athletes go on to become great leaders and do wonderful things professionally.
I agree with you. I say the number one thing I look for when I'm hiring is grit. I look for people that are resilient, that can overcome obstacles, because especially as an entrepreneur and a business leader, we're going to come up against, my competitors are 40 billion, $150 billion companies, right? And we're going up against these guys. They're going to pull out all the stops, and we have to be able to be, we have to find ways to work around all the obstacles they're going to put up against us. And so I want employees that have a history of overcoming difficulties that have failed. I like to hire military veterans, because they've had that experience, and like you said, athletes, student athletes have gone through those failures. They have lost. I mean, Danny Woodhead didn't win a Super Bowl, but he played at an elite level, but he never got that ring, and that's just he's there. He can tell that story to other people who are, facing failure and facing, challenges.
Yeah. Well, the really neat thing about Danny, not that I'll bore you too long, was that Danny, when nobody recruited him in college, he went to a Division II school where he won that version of the Heisman. He went to Chadron State. Nebraska didn't want him. They wouldn't even let him walk on. Then he's an undrafted free agent. Nobody drafts him in the pros. He's 5'8". He doesn't look much bigger than I. He is bigger than I, but here's a guy that nobody really essentially wanted along the way. No Division I, no NFL draft. He gets cut by his first NFL team, and he somehow makes it 10 years and becomes a major contributor in the NFL as a guy that really everybody overlooked. And so even not getting, whether he got to the Super Bowl or not, it was constantly having to show, how do I bounce back? How do I stay present? How do I maximize my physical body and my mind to put myself in the best position to win a role? And so he's got really a cool story to share with businesses, because look, the NFL is a business.
Yeah.
And he's able to say, look, I was playing for the Patriots for a few years, arguably the best business in the NFL history. And let me tell you how they did it. How did they become the best business? So there's lots of lessons learned from what the Patriots did better than other organizations he was in, as to why they were more successful on average, because the Patriots didn't have better football players on average than most of the other teams, but they had something. That was grit, culture, all those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, I'm a lifelong Patriots fan. So when Woodhead was on the team, he was a crowd favorite. We loved him. I think it's because we recognize all that he had overcome to get to where he was. And I remember during the days he played, people were wearing the hats, the Woodhead hats, and people loved him. So I enjoyed.
And he's a neat guy. He's a really neat guy.
Yeah. Now I got to get him on the show sometime. That'd be fun. So just real quickly, you mentioned there's 15 powers in the book. What are some examples of some of those powers that you mentioned?
Yeah, so sure. So first, I kind of organized the book in a way, preparing for battle, and then max out your mind, max out your emotions, and max out your team. Okay. I felt like we needed to go in that order. So, for example, in the preparing for battle section, I have the power of the space, and that is this notion that you have a stimulus and a response. So something happens to you and you have this brief space as a human being to decide how to respond. I think anyone can relate to people that have road rage, or getting cut off in traffic, or a bad call that happens at a sporting event. You have this stimulus or an event happen, and we have this brief period as a human being to decide how we're going to respond. Are we going to lose our mind? We say it's not that big a deal. And that's the foundation of what we believe, that if you can learn to expand that space just a little bit, to have a little bit better time to say, all right, I'm not going to respond in a way that's going to hurt that person's feelings, but maybe ruin the relationship, or because we all have different triggers. And so if we're just being honest, every one of us have triggers where we're more prone to lose our mind or have regrets that we said something or did something that we wish we wouldn't have done. Right. And a lot of times when we look back and see that we've had a regret about a relationship that went bad, or maybe the way we had a conversation with our teenager, it's usually because we didn't manage that space very well. And I'm a big believer you can train that space through the core mental skills that I teach and through mindfulness strategies. And by doing that, maybe you just take a deep breath and go, you know what, it's just not that big a deal that I hit another red light. Or, you know what, I'm just not going to lose my mind. It's a teenager. They made a mistake, and I'm not going to say things to ruin the relationship, but I'm going to hold them accountable. So, and then, I'm a big positive psychology guy, catching people doing something right and reinforcing that behavior.
That's a great leadership technique too. Yeah.
And trying to get coaches and team leaders to do that doesn't mean you don't hold people accountable. Of course, occasionally you criticize and hold people accountable, but you do it in the right way. And then I teach the 4 legs of elite performance: the physical, mental, technical, and tactical areas that you have to be great. That's the preparing for battle. And maxing out your mind, it's about teaching the high performance mental skills, the power of mindfulness, the power of mindset, the power of grit we just talked about. And then in max out of emotions, I talk about the power of happiness and appreciation and gratitude. And then one that I love a lot is the power of vulnerability. I spend a ton of time with coaches and athletes helping them learn how to be vulnerable, because the only way you can get to ultimate trust with a team is if you're willing to share things about yourself, to get to deeper relationships with your team. And it requires some level of vulnerability, right? To be seen and not to worry that people aren't going to like you when you share something about yourself. And then I feel like once you've taken care of that, if you're on a team, you can max out your team. And mine are the power of positive teams, the power of positive coaches, the power of positive leadership, the power of evolution, The Power of Positive Leadership I teach through the lens of Coach Kirsten Bernthal Booth at Creighton, who's singly the most well-balanced coach I've ever been around. She is the women's volleyball coach and just a neat human being and a great story. I mean, she took over a team that was 3-23 and has taken them to the NCAA tournament 8 years in a row. And then my Power of Evolution chapter is on Coach John Cook and my 9 years of working with him. And though watching him evolve, even though when I met him, his record was 320 wins and 26 losses. Think about that. Wow. He'd won over 90% of his games, but he was in the middle of a form of a mind-body stress reaction or a nervous breakdown. And he wasn't starting to get the best out of his teams despite all of that. And the evolution of him, and I'll tell you this, his quote, he said, "I wish I learned how to coach out of love instead of anger earlier in my career." When he said that at a talk about a year and a half ago, I knew, like, wow, Jack and I and me had done a great job with him, because he was a guy that did often coach out of anger first, despite how successful he was. But he learned how to coach out of love and still train at a high level. And oh my gosh, he started winning more national titles than ever. And then my last chapter is called The Power of Ultimate Trust. And that's where we try to get every team, which is a next level of trust between coaches and assistant coaches and coaches and team and team and team and team and support staff. And that requires building deeper relationships, getting to know each other at a way you never have before. And it requires you to share experiences that maybe you wouldn't normally share with people. But in the end, it's never about the technical parts or what you're good at skill-wise. It's about what Jack had said earlier, that it's brotherhood and love and connection that gets you to fight for the person on your right or left, literally to life and death as a Navy SEAL or as a naval person like yourself. Here, it's about winning and losing. At times, it's a different level, but how do you get there when maybe you didn't get the role you wanted, or maybe you're injured this year, or maybe you're in a slump? Can you still fight for that person on all sides to help get the best out of your team? So at the end of the day, that's kind of how I organize my book. Each power is a different ingredient that I think will help either, max yourself out or then eventually max your team out.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Deep Leadership is brought to you by Peak Demand. Peak Demand is a veteran-led manufacturer of products for electric utilities. They help utilities keep the lights on. Building and maintaining the nation's electrical grid is hard work, but getting the critical components to keep it running shouldn't be. Peak Demand's products ship in just 24 hours, where most other suppliers can take up to 8 weeks. Go to peakdemand.com and learn more about the Peak Demand difference and request a free sample. Deep Leadership is also brought to you by my Amazon best-selling book, I Have the Watch, Becoming a Leader Worth Following. This book is filled with 23 short stories on how you can become a more effective leader. Learn how to unleash the power of people with this easy, practical guide. Go to IHaveTheWatch.com and click the large orange button for signed copies. Enter the discount code DEEPLEADERSHIP, one word, at checkout to get 20% off your order, and domestic shipping is always free. One of my questions was to you is what do you think business leaders will gain from reading this book? And I think you answered that question just by how you described the book, because all the things that you talk about, I think they relate deeply into the leadership role and running an organization, running a business, and running a nonprofit. It's the people, it's the relationships, it's the trust. It's the communication, it's the vulnerability, what I call being authentic as a leader, and not being a fake robot, like everything is great, just do these things. But also, we touched on love and just love and respect for the people that work for you. And in my mind, I always say that there's no one person more important than another. We all contribute to the role of the success of the organization. It's the same thing with a sports team, right? Even if you're injured that year, you can still play a role helping develop the younger players and teaching and training and mentoring. And so there's always a role for even the people that might be injured.
Yeah, some of my favorite stories in the book are about people who either didn't have a big role on the court that year, or didn't have one at all, and then was asked to step in because of an injury or for whatever reason and delivered under pressure. Because there's just nothing better and nothing harder to do than to prepare every day for your sport, 20 hours a week, when mentally you don't think there's a high likelihood you're going to play today or you're going to play very much. But can you keep your head in the game and be the best on the scout side of this team and make the team better? In the meantime, you're paying attention. And when your number is called, you deliver. And I have I have several stories in there that are just my favorite about young ladies and men stepping up under pressure when it mattered. And they hadn't played much, and then they delivered for their team. And that's really cool. And then, as you mentioned with the businesses, in my Power of Positive Teams chapter, I spent a fair amount of time talking about what Google learned and what MIT learned about what creates the best teams. And both of them had the hypothesis that if you put the best and the brightest together, it would produce the best teams. And they were patently false in both of those. Of course, it helps to have talent, but the best and the brightest, if there aren't certain ingredients like psychological safety, right? And everybody playing a role. If there aren't certain ingredients, those teams don't tend to max out, even if it appears that they have all the talent. And so I use a lot of business examples of what they've learned. And as simple as watching Apple evolve from a company that was bankrupt to obviously one of the best in the world, and Kodak, who had a monopoly, who's bankrupt because they didn't evolve, for example. And so there are a lot of lessons learned through the lens of sport that I think they can relate to. But then there's also lessons learned from what some of the great institutions of this world who have studied the great business teams and the great teams in general. What have they done different in the business world or in the business of life?
Oh, I think it's great. I think they apply. I mean, I know I've had a lot of discussions with coaches, and the coach and the leader play a very similar role, and one of the differences is that the coaches know they don't step on the field. They have to prepare their people, but they have to step off the field and they have to let their people play. And that's one of the problems sometimes with leaders is they don't necessarily step off the field. They want to, especially entrepreneurs, sometimes they hold too tightly to the reins of the business. They don't really let go of and let really people be excellent, and so I think, but part of that, but there's a very similar analogy between coaches and leaders. We play a very similar role to motivate the team, communicate the goals, build the team, pick the right people for the team, make sure everybody is very clear on their roles and what they're going to do. It's very, very similar.
Yeah, and the best coaches, interestingly, have learned to micromanage less. Again, Coach John Cook, Urban Meyer talks specifically about how he learned to finally quit micromanaging, and Pete Carroll from the Seattle Seahawks has done a great job of empowering his coaches. But that's true for tons of coaches, and that's at the high school and college level. But again, that notion to micromanage when you're a leader and you want to have control, to be able to give up that space a bit over time as you gain experience and recognize that you have assistant coaches and you have managers and you have senior leadership below you, and you've got to let them do their job. Yeah. And that's the number one ingredient, by the way, circling back to the Patriots. When you look at their core values they set, number one is do your job. And that's one of the things that Danny Woodhead said they did so much better than other organizations. Like, they live their values, that if be on time was a value and then you're 10 minutes late at one organization and there's no consequence, and that'll get into our ingredients and leaders, there's a problem there. Yeah. He says, you were 1 minute late at the Patriots and it was a significant fine. So that if you had a value that was important to your group, whatever it was, if you didn't do it, you weren't there anymore. Like, you had to live those values. And some organizations have these values that they consider core tenets, but then if you don't follow them very well, and if you maybe deliver quite a bit performance-wise in the short term, they overlook it. But that causes all kinds of breakdown in trust.
Absolutely.
In the long term, and eventually it leads to a non-trusting organization. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, when you're not living to the values, or one of your employees isn't living up to those values and nothing is done about it, it destroys the entire organization, because they're saying, wait a second, I thought this is where we stood, and this person can get away with it because X, right? Or whatever the reason, the entire organization starts saying, well, wait a second, well, maybe these aren't important values, And so I think you're right. I think from what I understand about the Patriots, it doesn't matter who you are, even Tom Brady, if you're late, you're going to get in trouble, right? So,
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So I love that. So let me circle back. There's one question I ask all my guests, and just kind of be interesting to hear your perspective. So, what would you say some of the characteristics of a great leader is, or a great coach?
Yeah, well, and again, everyone has their own, and I'm sure mine overlap with a lot of people, but I actually have 8 ingredients of leaders that I've come up with, and I outline them in those chapters. But the first one is, what's your contribution to the problem? And the second one is modeling behaviors. The third one is consistency. The fourth one is what I call alignment of time and effort with what you value. My fifth one is called open door policy. My sixth one is called healthy mixture of love and accountability. My seventh is willingness to adapt and evolve. And my eighth is building trust. And I'm happy to go into more detail on any of those if you're interested. But those are the ones that I really sort of, when I'm talking to coaches who I consider a leader, like you said, or, the head of a company, that here are the things that I say, this is what I've learned from this is what the best do better than others. And try to figure out which ones they're already doing well, which ones maybe they could do some improvement in. And I really challenge team leaders and captains to look at these as well, because if you think about it, they may be a follower as it relates to the coach, but they're a leader of their team. And the best teams I've been around, the leaders take control of that locker room. They take control of the things that are necessary for a team to stay accountable and committed. And if the coaches have to do all of that, it doesn't mean it doesn't get done, but not at the same level. So and it's hard today for athletes in that age range that we're talking about, anywhere from 16 to 23, to hold people accountable the same way maybe that was done a generation ago, because of the way we're raised, and we're so much worried about what people think of us, and we're not going to be liked. And it's just a very challenging thing for leaders to take control of that locker room, so to speak, and make sure that they manage things rather than the coaches have to doing everything.
No, I like that a lot. Talk to me about your second thing was modeling. Say that one more time. You said modeling
behaviors.
Modeling behavior. So what do you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is, John Wooden used to say, young people need models, not critics. He was a famous UCLA coach. And I say, really, everybody does. But my example would be is that whatever you want out of your team, you better show them how to do it. So if you want your team, I'll give you one example that ties into what's your contribution to the problem. But Coach John Cook, again, at Nebraska, very successful, one of the top coaches of all time in the volleyball world, 4 national titles, 90% of his games. And prior to the 15 season, they hadn't made the Final Four in 7 years, which was crazy for a team like them that was making it every year. He said, one of the things we struggle with is playing with fear at the end of a game. He says, why are we doing that? And I said to him, why do you think they're doing that? And he listed off 8 or 10 reasons why the team played with fear. And some of them were valid and almost not relevant in the sense of where I'm going. And I said to him, okay, we'll work on those. But coach, what's your contribution to the team playing with fear? And he couldn't come up with an answer the first day. He was like, I don't think I'm contributing. I said, okay. So if you want your team to play with fearless, you have to model fearlessness. So let's ask the team some questions. All right. Now I'll give you just a couple examples. So this will help illustrate it. So coach, who sits a lot of the game, when you start to pace the sidelines, what do you think your team thinks? And he says, I think they think I love it, that they love it, that they think I'm engaged. And I'd bring one of the ladies in and say, tell coach, what do you think when he starts pacing? Coach, we think you don't trust us and you make us really anxious. I said, all right, coach, why does the team look over at you, or a particular team member look over at you after they make a mistake on the court? He says, well, that's easy. He says, they're looking for a correction and I give it to them. What did they do wrong? I said, all right, Kelly, come tell coach why you guys look over. Coach, we look over at you because you tend to pull us after we make a single mistake. And we're looking to see if the whistle's going to blow it. Are you pulling us out in front of 8,000 people and embarrassing us and making us sit down? And we're worried already that if we make a second mistake, that you're definitely going to pull us. I said, okay. And so forth. And I said, okay, coach, sometimes when it's 23-20 and you're winning and now it's 23-all late in the game and you call a timeout, the other team scored 3 in a row and you kind of slam your clipboard, you're putting your hands through your hair. What do you think the team thinks? He says, they think they love it, that they know I'm fired up and I got their back and I'm going to tell them how we're going to turn this around. And they say, Coach, when you're like that, it just makes us lose our minds. Like, we're not calm anymore when you're not calm. And a famous Navy SEAL, although now I'm blanking on his name, had a very short video where he calls it calm is contagious. He said that's the number one thing he learned as a SEAL was that whatever you do is contagious. Calm is contagious. Anger is contagious.
Yes.
And so circling back around, I said to Coach, can you see how those things could make your team play with fear at the end of the game? You want your team to be present and locked in right here, right now. And when they make a mistake, they're already worried about the future. Are you pulling them? Or they're already thinking, if I make another mistake, he's definitely pulling me from the game, and they're no longer communicating with their team. And so I asked them just do a couple things. So could you agree to not stand up during a game unless you need to talk to your setter? Because your team already tells you they're more anxious. And can you agree to not pull anybody on the team unless they completely discombobulate, which on occasion, somebody's made some, or they break team chemistry, like they've completely caused a rift on the court, maybe saying something very inappropriate to a teammate. Can you let your setter, Kelly Hunter at the time, work through this and let you know? Otherwise, let them work through their mistakes and they'll quit looking over at you and they're going to stay focused and present. And he quit doing those things. And that's not the reason that they won it all. But he started modeling the behaviors of fearlessness for them in the timeouts, after a mistake. When he got stressed himself, he tended to sit down. And so everyone thought something was wrong with him. They're like, why isn't he up pacing anymore? Like, people were asking me, what's wrong? Yeah. Or is he not interested anymore? And I said, no, that's just what he's trying to do. And so the team learned how to play fearless when it mattered the most. It did not mean they were going to win the national title. It turns out they did win it that year, which is really cool when you can be rewarded, because I always say life in sport isn't always fair. You can do everything right, have a perfect nutrition plan and get all your sleep and train harder than ever, but it doesn't mean you're going to always get your goal to happen. I wish it was that simple in sport and life, but when it all comes together, it's really cool, right? And so I believe whatever you want, if you want your team to communicate positively, then you can't have them see you yelling at your assistant coaches when you're frustrated and then expect them to, for an example. And so whatever you want out of your team, model it for them. I think it's the key ingredient of leaders and coaches.
I love that story. I think that's so great. I was listening to a podcast of a captain, a Navy captain on a submarine, and he said this, and I really appreciate it. He said, leadership is theater. He said, how you react to things sets the mood for the entire team. And he recognized every time when he was the captain of the submarine, every room he walked into, every place he went, everything he looked at was everybody was looking in his direction. Everybody was like, oh, what's the captain going to say? What's the captain going to do? He realized that it's theater. Like, he's on stage all the time. And especially on a submarine, you don't ever leave, right? So you're on stage all the time. And that what he said and did and acted, it all mattered. It all was part of that. And so you can use that to your advantage to help lead your team better, but also it can be to your detriment as they see your behaviors change, like at the end of a game like that. So it's incredible. That's a great story. I love that.
Yeah. And if you think about it too, right? If a leader with all their experience in that position can't model that behavior, how can you ever expect those that you lead to do that? And then the last part of that is that even leaders that are really good at that, I always tell people that under stress, sometimes we revert back to old behaviors, especially if we don't talk about it. So the very last piece of that story that I just want to share with you about that national title game was that before that game, I said to the setter, who had a great relationship, but who had built ultimate trust with the coach. Think about it. Coach and athlete is not an equal relationship. I said to her, under stress, sometimes the best leaders revert back to old behaviors. And this is a big game. They haven't been in a title game in years. And I said, if coach starts to stand and pace, do you have the courage to tell him to sit down and that you got this? She said, I can do it. And I said to coach, I said, same thing. Sometimes we revert. I said, are you okay if you start to pace if Kelly comes over and says, you coach, we got this? He says, yes, no problem. I'd like her to do that. And sure enough, early in that game, there was a terrible call, and it was a bad call. I'll give him that. He did start to get up and pace, and he didn't sit for a minute. And she walked over to him, and for a long time, I thought she said, sit down, coach, we've got this. Well, he was on a podcast last year with Terry Pettit, who was the mentor to him back in the day. And he said that Kelly walked over and said, sit your ass down, coach, we've got this, which is really cool when you think about the trust that was built up. It wasn't disrespectful. It was almost humorous. He never got up again. And he even said at the end, I don't feel like I coached. But she was able to because that's the next piece, is that if you don't build trust with those that you lead and vice versa, that if you revert, all you get is a bunch of yes people still telling you you're doing a great job if you have the wrong circle around you. And so if you have a person that's definitely an unequal relationship, be able to have the courage because you've built that trust to say, hey, coach, we got this. Sit down. Think about the power of that, right? I'm not saying they would have lost if he kept pacing, but we do know if he kept pacing that they tend to feel like he's lost trust in them and they're more nervous. So maybe they do start to play with fear. Right. So we will never know that. But anyway, that's the last part of that, because I think that's the key ingredient for the leader. And my last ingredient, but it's the most important in a way, which is if you do all the other 7 well, you're going to build trust with those you lead. And if you can build trust with those you lead, your team can build trust. Because if you can't build the trust with your team, how do you expect your team, who tends to be much younger than you and much less experienced, how do you get them to build ultimate trust with each other? So anyway, that's my long-winded version of that story.
No, I love it. That's great. I'm excited to get into this book. So how can listeners connect with you, find out more about your company, your book, your podcast? How do they reach out to you?
Well, sure. So our company's called Performance Mountain. So we're on all the different social media platforms that they don't let me manage any of it. So Performance Mountain is all one word. So performancemountain.com. And on there has everything. There's a Max Out Mindset page, which is the portion of Performance Mountain where lots of teams are worked with. I have about 20 teams I work with at all different levels. And that's where you can find my book. You can actually buy my book right now on the Performance Mountain site. It pops right up, or you click on Max Out Mindset and you can buy it right now and it'll be shipped to you. And then I had to learn what it was, but like for me I am on Twitter and social media myself, and I'm called Doc, capital DOC, and it's an _ elite. So Doc, I didn't know what that little thing was called. I had to ask today. So it's capital DOC, Doc, like short for doctor, _ elite. And I'm mostly on Twitter. I do a little bit on Facebook, and I have an Instagram account that they put a few things on, but really that's where I do most of my work, is on Twitter. So that's where I share a lot of stories, is on Twitter. So Doc, capital DOC _ elite. If you follow me on Twitter, you can just learn a lot about what I do with teams. And I share a lot of articles and just my thoughts on life and mental health and performance and how to just be a better human being. It's hard to be that this day and age for a variety of reasons. So to be kind today is just kind of a neat thing to do. If we could focus on just being kind to one another, it goes a long way in this world right now.
It's a superpower right now.
It really is, but it's a choice and it's hard. And so especially when life is hitting you back quite a ways, can you still be kind and still pay attention to others and just ask people how they're doing? Because as I mentioned, there's so much psychological distress right now. And I can't say when that's going to go away, because we have a lot of things going on in this country right now that complicate things. And that's probably always true of every generation. But right now, it seems to be a little bit more than maybe it has been the last few years. And so let's just be kind to one another and reach out and help each other out. And we don't have to agree on everything. We don't have to have the exact same view on a policy or a politic or how we think about things to still be friends with people and still connect with them. We don't have to have the exact same mindset on everything to say you're right and I'm wrong and vice versa. And, since I'm right, you're wrong, I can't discuss it with you. And I wish there was more dialogue like that in the world today where, all right, I don't agree with that with you, but I do find some common ground there with you. So, absolutely. And I still think you're a neat person. So let's still be friends,
Yeah. No, we need a lot more of that. And absolutely. That's great. So I will put links in the show notes for all of your social media accounts and the website, and then how to get the book. And I just, to all our listeners, I really encourage you to take a look at this book, Max Out Mindset. I think you're seeing, if you've listened to this episode, you're this far in it, you're going to see that, Larry's got a deep well that he's come from, and all this experience. He's talking about all these great stories, how you can lead an organization to the next level, and it's a mindset. And I think that Larry, I really appreciate you being on the show. I really gained a lot, and I look forward to getting the book and going through it. But I really appreciate your time, and this has just been really, really powerful. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thanks again for spending the time with me to talk to me about, how do you get an editor and how do you make a cover page of your book, and who resources for somebody like me who had never written a book, and just taking the time to talk to a stranger about what worked for you, and it made a huge difference for me, and so I thank you for that.
Well, I'm glad I could help in a little way. So I'm really looking forward to seeing this book.
Awesome.
All right. Well, that is it for today. So thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.
Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all you do.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information and updates, please visit our website at www.deepleadershippodcast.com or johnsrennie.com. Until next time, take care.